Russian attacks on Donetsk, Kherson, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Sumy, Mykolaiv, Zaporizhia, and Luhansk oblasts in the east, south, and north of Ukraine killed 2 people and wounded at least 12 in the past 24 hours, according to local authorities. Russian forces killed 1 civilian and injured 2 more in Bakhmut, and killed another one in Soledar, Donetsk Oblast Governor Pavlo Kirilenko reported on January 9. Russia struck at least 10 settlements in the region, damaging 3 private houses and a store, Kirilenko said. On January 9 morning, Russia launched an S-300 missile at a local market in the village of Shevchenkov, injuring 7 people, including a 13-year-old girl, Kharkiv Oblast Governor Ola Sinyhubov wrote on Telegram. Russian troops struck Kherson Oblast 77 times with artillery, multiple launch rocket systems, MLRs, and mortars, wounding 3 people, according to Kherson Oblast Governor Yaroslav Yanushevich. The attacks damaged private houses and high-rises in the residential areas of Kherson city, Yanushevich said. Russian military hit Nikopol district in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast 2 times overnight with heavy artillery, firing at least 10 projectiles at the Chervenohorivka and Marinets communities, Valentin Rezachenko, the oblast governor, wrote on Telegram. There were no casualties, he added. Zaporizhia Oblast State Administration reported that civilian infrastructure in 18 settlements in Zaporizhia Oblast came under Russian fire. Russia struck 3 communities in Sumy Oblast close to the border with Russia 63 times at night and in the morning of January 9, the Oblast Governor Dmytro Zhyvytysky reported. No casualties were reported, and Zhyvytysky didn't provide information on damage. Russian forces hit the Hremyak and Vishenki settlements in Chernihiv Oblast near the Russia-Ukraine border on January 8, according to Northern Operational Command. Russian troops fired 6 projectiles from mortars, 1 grenade, and 15 shells from MLRS at the villages, damaging a car, the Ukrainian military said. No casualties were reported. 8 settlements of Luhansk Oblast were attacked by Russian artillery and tanks over the past 24 hours, the regional state administration wrote. There was no information on casualties and damage. A senior Ukrainian cybersecurity official said Russian cyber attacks on critical and civilian infrastructure could equate to war crimes. Viktor Zora, the Chief Digital Transformation Officer at the State Service of Special Communication and Information Protection of Ukraine, SISUP, told Politico that Ukrainian officials are gathering evidence of Russian cyber attacks to share with the International Criminal Court, ICC, in The Hague. Russia's attacks on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, including energy facilities, were last month described by the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights as possible war crimes. Russia has been accused of multiple war crimes since it launched its invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Ukraine's Prosecutor General, Andriy Kostin, said in September that his office had documented some 34,000 potential war crimes committed by Russian forces. Investigators are looking into events in Bucha, Mariupol, and the rape and torture of children, with the idea that these could be brought before judges in The Hague. Russia's state government moved ahead with a bill on Sunday that would classify maps that question its territorial integrity as extremist materials. In recent years, Russia's anti-extremism law has been continually expanded to assert increasing control over political opponents. The latest amendment, first introduced in December, was added after lawmakers noted that some maps dispute what Russia calls the territorial affiliation of Crimea and the Kuril Islands, according to Reuters. Russia has claimed Crimea as Russian territory since its troops seized the land from Ukraine in 2014, a claim rejected not only by Ukraine but by almost 100 UN member states. Independent Russian outlet Meduza, in editorial remarks, said the amendment will likely apply to the regions of Ukraine occupied by Russia since its 2022 invasion. In September, Russian President Vladimir Putin declared the partially occupied Ukrainian regions of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk as Russian territories. As of January, much of Zaporizhia and Kherson, including Kherson City, remain in Ukrainian hands, according to the most recent assessment by U.S. think tank the Institute for the Study of War. Russia has been using its newest Sukhoi Su-57 combat jets, also known as Felon, to attack targets in Ukraine since at least June, but only from its own territory to avoid losing the aircraft, the UK Defence Ministry reported on January 9. This is symptomatic of Russia's continued risk-averse approach to employing its air force in the war, reads the report. Russian air forces have likely employed the Felon jet stationed at the Aktubinsk air base around 500 kilometers from the Ukrainian border to launch long-range air-to-surface or air-to-air missiles into the country, the UK Defence Ministry wrote in its latest intelligence update. This is the only known Felon base in Russia, according to the report. Following alleged Ukrainian drone attacks on Russia's Engels air base in December, the Russian military redeployed its bombers to the country's far east, according to Alexei Danilov, Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council. According to the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces, Russia has lost 285 airplanes since the beginning of its full-scale war against Ukraine. Russian troops have stepped up an assault on the town of Soledar in eastern Ukraine, forcing Ukrainian troops to repel waves of attacks led by mercenary forces, officials in Kyiv said. Britain's defense ministry said on Tuesday that Russian and forces of the Wagner contract group were probably now in control of most of the small salt mining town after advances in the last 4 days. Soledar, in the industrial Donbass region, lies a few miles from Bakhmut, where troops from both sides have been taking heavy losses in some of the most intense trench warfare since Russia invaded Ukraine nearly 11 months ago. Wagner was founded by Yevgeny Prigozhin, an ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Drawing some recruits from Russia's prisons and known for uncompromising violence, it is active in conflicts in Africa and has taken a prominent role in Russia's war effort in Ukraine. Ukrainian officials, led by the Commander-in-Chief General Valery Zaluzhny, have warned that Russia is preparing fresh troops for a new offensive on Ukraine, possibly on the capital Kyiv. France, Germany, and the United States all pledged last week to send armored fighting vehicles, fulfilling a long-standing Ukrainian request. Britain is considering supplying Ukraine with tanks for the first time, Sky News reported, citing a Western source. Britain's defense ministry did not comment. The occupation administration of the Russian Federation in Crimea has put up for sale 100% of the shares of the state-owned company Yevpatoria Aircraft Repair Plant, which is a part of Ukroboronprom, an association of multi-product companies in various sectors of the Ukrainian defense industry, edition. The plant has been located in the temporarily occupied territory since 2014. This is the third attempt by the invaders to sell what does not belong to them, the state-owned company stressed. The actions of the occupation authorities of the Russian Federation are another manifestation of aggression against the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, and the results of the sham auction will be considered null and void. The Autonomous Republic of Crimea, temporarily occupied by Russia, is an integral part of the territory of Ukraine, which is subject to the constitution and laws of Ukraine as well as international treaties ratified by the Verkhovna Rada, the Ukrainian parliament. The temporary Russian occupation of the territories of Ukraine is illegal and does not create any territorial rights for the aggressor state. People look at the site of a missile strike that occurred during the night, in Kramatorsk, Ukraine, January 8, 2023. Kyiv has denied Russia's claim that it just killed more than 600 Ukrainian troops in a deadly attack. While there is no evidence that such an attack happened, Moscow has alleged that it was behind a mass missile strike in the Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk, in the east over the weekend. Russia claimed that this was its retaliatory strike for the New Year's Day attack, which Moscow says killed 89 of its own soldiers while they were in a Russian base. Ukraine, on the other hand, claims as many as 400 Russian troops were actually killed or wounded in the same strike. Now, Russia's defense ministry has suggested that more than 600 Ukrainian soldiers were killed after Moscow targeted buildings where 1,300 troops were supposedly temporarily based. The local mayor shared images of the damaged buildings and claimed 2 school sites, 8 apartment buildings and garages were affected, but there were no reported casualties, according to reports on the ground. Kramatorsk is also easily accessible, and journalists in the area said there were no sign that there were hundreds of casualties from the attack. He said that the Russians did attack the area with 7 missiles, but it had no impact on the Ukrainian army. It comes after Russian President Vladimir Putin suggested a 36-hour ceasefire last week, so Russian citizens could mark the Orthodox Christmas, although shelling began very soon after. The UK's Ministry of Defence also explained what was going on with Russia's weaponry in its latest update. Ukraine's military intelligence has also alleged that Russia is looking to mobilize as many as 500,000 conscripts in mid-January, on top of the 300,000 brought into the army back in October. Russia has denied any plans for a second wave of mobilization. It's worth noting that the September call-up sparked protests across the country. Russia is holding back on using its most advanced fighter jets over Ukrainian airspace because it's scared they'll get shot down, the UK's defense ministry said on Monday. In its latest intelligence update, the defense ministry said Moscow had almost certainly used Su-57 Felon fighter jets to conduct missions against Ukraine since at least June. For an aircraft to be considered fifth generation, it must possess specific technical characteristics such as the ability to fly at supersonic speeds without afterburners. The Defense Ministry cited a satellite image taken on December 25 indicating that 5 of the jets were housed at the only known Felon air base in Russia, in the southern region of Aktubinsk. Russia's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, said in August that the Felon had already been used brilliantly in combat since Russia's invasion, though there was little evidence at the time that this was the case. Russia's wary tactic is indicative of its continued risk-averse approach to employing its air force in the war against Ukraine, given the risk of significant losses. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine said in an update on Monday that Russia had lost more than 280 airplanes since the beginning of its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Kyiv expects the European Union to include Russian state nuclear energy company Rosatom in its next round of sanctions over the war in Ukraine, Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal said on Monday. Shmyhal said after talks in Kyiv with Franz Timmermans, a vice president of the European Union's Executive European Commission, that Russia's nuclear energy industry should be punished over the invasion of Ukraine more than 10 months ago. Russia has occupied the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station in southeastern Ukraine since last March, and President Vladimir Putin issued a decree last October transferring control of the plant from Ukrainian nuclear energy company Energodom to a subsidiary of Rosatom. Kyiv says the move amounts to theft. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, the United Nations nuclear power watchdog, has repeatedly expressed concern over shelling of the Zaporizhzhia plant, which each side blames on the other. The IAEA has also proposed the establishment of a nuclear safety and security protection zone around what is Europe's largest nuclear power plant. Biden actually sought a peaceful solution to Russia's warmongering and condemned the invasion. It was Trump who called Putin's invasion genius at the time. The Mar-a-Lago event, a mini-campaign speech, reportedly was linked to the Conservative Political Action Conference. Trump also told his audience he invited professors to the White House to explain how horrible a nuclear war would be if it came up in the presidential debates. The former president, speaking from a podium, also insisted that a lunatic fatally shot Capitol rioter Ashley Babbitt during the January 6 violence in 2021. The Justice Department investigated Babbitt's shooting and chose not to prosecute the Capitol police officer who shot her. Trump again insisted the rioters were merely protesting a dishonest election. There's no evidence the vote was dishonest. Nearly 1,000 rioters have been charged or convicted in the January 6 riot. The Justice Department continues investigating.